ago, channel viewer Arthur sent me an email offering me a selection of rather nice cars for review. What probably came most as a surprise to him though was the one that I actually chose to review first, being a humble Peugeot 406. Peugeot had been extremely successful with this car's predecessor, the 405, a car which had both a reputation for durability but also has been quite a nice car to drive, and certainly a very good looking one at that too. So it was quite a tall act to follow when Peugeot set out to create the 406. The tender was put out to various styling houses which weren't unusual for Peugeot, but they ended up actually going with an in-house design for the 406, and quite a handsome design it is too. Now this particular car I'm driving is a facelifted model, although to be honest the overall silhouette of the car hasn't really changed at all. It's predominantly things like the headlights and grille and the tail lights that are the most obvious changes. Part of the brief put out to the engineers at Peugeot when developing this car was that it had to be the most dynamic front-wheel drive car in its class. Arthur had previously had his breath taken away with a 405 himself, the MI16 version, which now that is certainly a car I would like to get my hands on. So we owned that car for a few years from '97, but in 1999 saw this car available in his local Peugeot dealer. Now the car has been with him almost since new. The car was actually pre-registered and was, I believe, about 6 months old at the time. Now the retail price on these cars when they were new would have been somewhere in the region of about £22,000. The vast majority of Peugeot 406s in the UK would have probably been purchased with either the 1.8 or 2 litre naturally aspirated engines, or one of the diesel engines. In fact, the diesel version, I believe, was the best-selling diesel car in Europe for a time. There was also a 2 litre turbocharged version as well. Now Arthur did look at the 2 litre normally aspirated car, but unfortunately, being that it's a little bit heavier than the 405 which it replaced, he did find the performance just that little bit lacklustre. And on that basis he opted for this, the 3 litre V6. Well, I say a 3 litre, it's actually closer to a 2.9 but badged as a 3 litre. But best of all, it's mated to a 5-speed manual gearbox. Idle, the V6 has got a rather nice burble to it, but in general when driving around town you wouldn't really be aware of what was under the bonnet at all. The engine is nicely hushed. But when you do drop it down a gear and open it up, it really does pick up rather nicely. In fact, one thing I do like with this car is how much mid-range pull it does actually seem to have. Once you get to sort of 2.5–3,000, I wouldn't say it's much exhaust noise, it's probably more induction noise. You've got this really nice bark to it. But it wasn't just the engine that was high on Peugeot's brief for this car, because it also had to handle well. It had to live up to that slogan of Peugeot, the drive of your life. So Peugeot spent around £35 million in developing an all-new multi-link rear suspension for this car. Don't misunderstand me, it's certainly no Nürburgring car. It is very softly sprung and probably quite a competent cruiser. But even though there is a little bit of body roll, the car just does grip and grip and grip. It feels extremely competent at speed. Of course, if you do find yourself on a motorway, which in all honesty back in the day is probably where the majority of these cars did end up, you will find something that's quite comfortable. I mean, the car, even in top gear, will pull quite nicely from 40 miles per hour. It's very quiet when going down the road. The interior of this car is quite a nice place to be. There are not many squeaks and rattles for considering the age of this car. It's now over 20 years old. There is a little bit of sort of soft touch plastic on top of the dashboard and some harder elephant hide material lower down. We've got plenty of leather on the doors though, and I do love this fluted leather that we've got on these seats. A style that Rover sort of picked up with the 75 in the early 2000s as well. I do like that very much. Of course, if you didn't want black leather, there was the option of a lighter cover for no additional cost. As you would expect for a flagship model as well, you have got plenty of equipment in here. So you've got single zone climate control and a radio cassette with a multi-CD changer as well. As impressive a car as this is, Arthur had the car for a few years and then saw a point to move it on. But it didn't move very far because the car ended up in the possession of his father. His father actually ran this car until it was close to 20 years old, and I'm told he was still doing trips onto the continent with the car even then. But as with any car of age, you do start to think, is it really suitable to keep running it as a daily drive, especially on longer journeys? So this car actually ended up coming back to Arthur and resides in his small collection. And I can see why he was quite happy to have the car back. You really do forget that you're driving a four-door saloon. In fact, having driven this now, I think a 406 Coupe probably would be the ultimate attainable GT car. Under the bonnet of these V6 versions at least beats the heart of a lion, and I can fully understand why these cars were selected to feature in the car chase sequence in Ronin. Now the power steering on this car is a variable system. It feels quite light when you're manoeuvring and wakes up quite nicely when you're going down the road at a bit more speed. The car generally, well, it weighs, I think it's got a curb weight of around 1400 kilos, but it does feel so much lighter. Even with that V6 engine slung out front, the car never really feels all that nose heavy. Now generally when I review a car, especially being that the car is obviously not mine and that it's a vehicle that I'm perhaps not used to, I do tend to drive a fair bit slower than I might normally initially. Now I have had this car out earlier along this route doing the drive-by shots that you'll have been seeing, and one thing I found is that you very quickly feel ease with this car. If you drop it down through the gears, it's quite enjoyable through the bends, but just there I actually came through that bend in 5th gear. And there were bags of mid-range torque. This really is a very forgiving car indeed to drive. If there were a single criticism of this car, and really I am struggling to find any at all, is that the throw of the gear lever is quite long. Now anyone who's driven French cars from this era, be it Peugeots or Renaults, you will know that is quite a common thing. That said though, even though the throw is quite long, the change does feel relatively precise and very slick. Now the travel on the clutch pedal of this car, I did notice immediately, is very long. The actual biting point of the clutch feels extremely high. But perhaps that really shouldn't be too much of a surprise to me when you consider that this car has done almost 163,000 miles over the past 20 odd years and is still on its original clutch. In fact, Arthur has been looking to try and source some OEM specification components to refresh this car, particularly things like the suspension. So by all means, if you happen to have a stash of any such parts and you think you can help Arthur out, do drop something in the comments or drop me a message and I'll pass that on to him. Make no mistake, this is an extremely nice place to be. It's a really enjoyable car to drive. It rides extremely comfortably over even the worst of road surfaces. There's no sort of jiggling about, no crashing and banging. But yet when you do really want to open up the throttle and go, it does feel quite composed, really well poised. And I think Arthur is on the right lines with looking to do a factory refresh of this car. I think to refresh this to how it would have been when it left the factory will make for a really nice car. I have to say a huge thank you to Arthur for reaching out to me and for letting me drive this car today. As you can probably gather, I have really enjoyed it, and at some point over the next year or so I will hopefully be reviewing some of the other vehicles that he has in his modest collection. I also need to say a big thank you to the team at The Motorist, who once again have allowed me to use the site as a base for filming. Even if I don't do a great deal of filming on site, it's been extremely useful to me as a base to operate from, as it just means that the person who's loaning me the car at the very least has somewhere to sit either outside, or if the weather's not so good they can sit in the cafe, and there's plenty of food and drink available and things for them to have a look at and pass the time. I will of course leave some links in the video description to The Motorist. If it's somewhere you've not visited, by all means you may wish to check it out. All that remains to say is thank you very much indeed for watching today's car review. If you do have an interesting car that you think might sit well on the channel, drop me an email. Again, link to my email is in the video description. If you've enjoyed it, give the video a thumbs up. I do also love reading all your comments, if you care to put something in there. And do hit the subscribe button as well as the bell notification.